let's talk about WP Rig. What is it and why have you created it?
WP Rig is a new development rig for developing progressive themes. So it's a build process and starter theme combined into one convenient package that you just put into your development environment, whatever it is, and it helps you write PHP, CSS, and JavaScript, and then compile it into an extremely progressive, forward-looking theme. It was built because I've been teaching people how to build themes for many years through first lynda.com and then LinkedIn Learning. And the number one request I get back is, you can use a starter theme, and starter themes work fine, but if you want to extend them, you need to know, first of all, a lot about how WordPress works and how the template hierarchy works and everything else. And you also need to know how to build your own build process and use all these new technologies that everyone's using. And it becomes very complex because people just want to write PHP and CSS and JavaScript. They don't want to know what are the latest performance standards and go read all the blogs and do all this extra research. So I started working with Google on this project because we have a joint interest in improving the quality of the code on the web. So Google wants to dramatically improve the quality of code on the web quickly, and I've realized that WordPress is a good vehicle for that because WordPress is 30% of the web. So if the code quality of WordPress is better, 30% of the web becomes better as a result, right? Which benefits them. I want to use WordPress as a vehicle to further web standards. And I've been talking about this for years, that WordPress has such a huge footprint that if we do something, it just becomes the standard, right? The best example we currently have is responsive images. So if you look at statistics of web page load overall on the internet, you can actually see on the graph a drop when WordPress, I forget which version it was, but a version shipped that had responsive images, and then all of a sudden the average page size on the internet fell because of WordPress. And then you think, it's a major thing, but it's a relatively minor performance improvement. If we then implemented much stricter performance improvements on the web, all of a sudden we could actually significantly improve this. So what I've done is taken the concept of the starter theme, right? This boilerplate theme that has the general components you would use to build a theme, and said, what is it that people actually want? They want a starter theme that gives you some basic styling, so you're not starting from scratch completely, that gives you the most modern code possible. So, your menu is laid out using Flex, and your main layout is grid layout, and it has an accessible drop-down menu built in that works with mouse and keyboard and touch and everything else. And all these standard components are just there, so you don't have to build them. And then it gives you a build process that then optimizes all the code when you ship it, so that the end user who uses the theme doesn't have to, after the fact, install a minification plugin and a caching plugin and a lazy loading images plugin and everything. So out of the box, WP Rig gives you minified JavaScript and CSS. It runs your JavaScript through Babel, so you can write modern JavaScript in ES 2015. It runs your CSS or Sass through CSS Next and Post CSS, so you can use custom properties or CSS variables and all this other fancy new CSS stuff that doesn't exist yet. You can write it now and it gets compiled into something workable. It takes all these other performance enhancements that exist that we normally don't use in WordPress because they are kind of tricky to wire up. They're already wired up, so you don't have to figure out how to do it. It's just there, so you can just hook into it, and everything gets packaged into this nice little theme that you can ship out of the box. So if you just install WP Rig and run it the way it is, you get this nice minimalist theme. If you spend an hour working with it, you can completely restyle it and make it into your own theme. And if you spend more time, you can extend it and add components to it and just make it into something new.
You just mentioned Google is a partner. Yeah. You collaborated with Google in it, but the community was involved as well. You worked with Carrie Dills and some other people. Yeah.
So the WP Rig project is a true open source WordPress project, meaning it is not owned by a company. So I'm LinkedIn Learning, right? And LinkedIn Learning has fully committed to this to support WP Rig, both now at launch and in the future. And what we've done is we've said, LinkedIn Learning is donating my time to first build it and then maintain it. And we've also created courses to teach people how to use it that were released for free. So you don't have to have an account. You can just go watch it, and they will be free forever. In addition, we want it to be a thing that is owned by the community. So WP Rig lives under a GitHub organization account that isn't owned by us. Well, it's owned by me, right? But it's an organization account that isn't under a brand. So it's not a LinkedIn Learning thing or a Google thing or anything else. And everyone can contribute to it. So right now, I've contributed the majority of the code, but Google has helped me develop code. XWP has helped me develop some of the code. Other community members have helped develop it. I invited Rachel Cherry, who runs WP Campus and a bunch of other stuff, to be the co-maintainer. So the two of us are the ones that sit on top of the castle right now and make decisions. We're inviting in people to, well, anyone who wants to, but we've actively reached out to the accessibility group, to everyone else to get code contributions to make sure that this is the best practice. And moving forward, I want everyone to not just think of this as a thing I can download and use as a theme. I want people to think of this as a thing that they own. Meaning, you take it and you install WP Rig and you build your own themes with it. And then you figure out, oh, I can build this extension to it to do this fancy thing. And I think other people have use of this. Put it up as a pull request. And it'll probably get added in, right? So over time, it'll grow into more than just a development rig. It'll grow into this modular space where you as a developer can go in and say, in this theme, I'm going to need a slider. There's a slider component you can pull in. That's not a plugin, but it's like a finished component that you can just add in. Or in this theme, I need WooCommerce support. Well, if the WooCommerce team submits an extension, we will add it in. But they'll all be extensions that you can choose to plug into the theme as a developer. So it gives the developer full control over functionality, but availability of code, so they don't have to figure out how to do this every time. So once I come home from WordCamp Europe, one of the first things I'm doing is building a huge tutorial that showcases how to build a slider or a carousel component. Because one of the things that we've focused on a lot with WP Rig is make it work well with the AMP plugin. Some people will hear that and go, oh, so you are in Google's pocket. And my answer to that is actually not. It's just that the AMP plugin is something that will be used by a lot of people. And me as a theme developer, I cannot have an opinion about whether or not people should use the AMP plugin. That has to be the individual site owner's choice. What I want as a theme developer is control over what happens when the AMP plugin is activated, right? So in WP Rig, there's this function called WP Rig is AMP that allows you to test whether or not the AMP plugin is active. And then you can wrap your functionality in that conditional statement to either say, if the AMP plugin is active, do this. Or if the AMP plugin is not active, do this, right? So that once people click on it, you, the theme developer, can then make sure that they get the best experience possible. So the carousel is a good example. I personally think that image carousels, other than purely for images, is a terrible idea. And research shows that you shouldn't have them on your sites because people scroll past them. Ignore all that. Let's pretend it's something that people want. Because the reality is people will put them on their websites. Carousels and sliders are very challenging because they're hard to build. They're harder to make accessible. And one of the reasons why there's so much trouble with carousels is there are a million different versions of carousels out there. And they're all okay, and some of them are better than others, but they all have problems. And there's a ton of commercial products that try to solve it and everything. So every website you see with a carousel likely has a slightly different version of a carousel. And the accessibility community is like, oh my God, so we have to go and fix all of these, right? And then every time someone builds a theme, they'll go and grab a carousel and put it in, and then it'll change over time. And then in addition, you then have things like AMP that say, no, carousels are stupid. We're going to have our own carousel. Right? So the thinking behind this modularization that is in WP Rig is, what if we can have in WP Rig an extension called Carousel? All you need to do to get it to work is call it. You just say carousel here, and then you pass some value that says what images go into it, and then it appears. And then that module then has a fully accessible carousel marked up already. It has the styles necessary, it has the JavaScript necessary, and it's wrapped inside the test for AMP. And if the AMP plugin is activated, it brings in the AMP component instead. And it's modularized so that when you build a new theme, you just take the whole module and you just copy it over or activate it in that other theme, and it just kicks in and works without you having to then go and say, oh, how do I write this again? Which code did I copy from what website to make this work, right? Because then I can get the accessibility team to just commit the time to that one component. And that will then become the component. So when you see a carousel on a WordPress site, it'll be that one. It can look different for every single one of them because you can change it with styles and you can change its behavior and everything. But you know that the code is consistent, that it's accessible, that it works, and that it falls back if someone uses the AMP plugin, right? And that's the idea, to give the community this tool that helps us make consistently better code without having to do a ton of extra work.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, just because there's a million features, on top of that, out of the box, WP Rig tests your code against the WordPress coding standards.
Okay.
It lints both your PHP and CSS against WordPress coding standards. It lints your CSS against ESLint and WordPress coding standards, both in your editor, in the build process, and if you hook it up in Travis on GitHub. And all of this comes in the kit.
Oh.
So it really tries to enforce code quality. And it means that you as a developer don't need to figure out how to hook it up. It's hooked up already. You just run it, add the right extensions to your editor. You do that once, make one definition call to tell the editor where the files sit, and then it just all kicks in and works.